Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. Today I want to talk about kick and bass analysis and using references and using analyzers to check those references against your own kick and bass. So I think this should be a very nice video because this is a more requested kind of topic to talk about. Getting a better kick and bass sound tends to be what people like to spend a lot of time on, especially when browsing YouTube. So I think this video should do well. If you have any other suggestions for videos, leave a comment down below or join my Discord server if you haven't already, and place a suggestion there in the channel there so I can also react instantly because it's a little bit easier to see it there. But without further ado, let's get right into the tutorial part of the video. Alright, so what I have here is a kick and bass from a track that I am going to release hopefully fairly soon. And I have also a very simple kick and bass setup here. So I'll quickly play you the reference that we're going to use. And it sounds like this. So as you can hear, fairly nice kick and bass, looks very clean as well. But it's also nicely processed and nicely balanced. And then we have our own kick and bass here, which is a little bit less, doesn't sound as nice. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to take this kick and bass here to get as close to what we have here with the use of analyzers. So let's listen to this one here. So you can already hear that it's lacking a little bit and it's not as balanced and it's not as nice sounding. Also, there are some mixing problems, which we're all going to fix. But first of all, let's see what kind of setup I have for the referencing. So we'll start off with cyscope, which is a plugin that I've already shown off on this channel before. It looks like this, and if you open it up and play the kick and bass here, and if we don't solo anything, you can see, you should be able to see, if I'm not, okay, yeah, you have to put these to input for some reason. That doesn't always work. That should now be set up. You can see it's a little bit of a mess, but then we go to layers and you can see each of the layers that we have. You can see our reference here, which we can turn off and on. We have our own kick here and we have our own bass line. So that's useful information to see what your kick and bass is doing in terms of how the waveform is looking. And there's a lot that we can use this for, and we'll go over how we can use this in a little bit. But first I want to show you the other setup that we have, and that is span. And span works a little bit differently. There's a little bit more work involved. With the setup here, the only thing you have to do is set it up like this. So you have each individual audio track, and that takes input from the track that you want to send. So we have reference here, which is this track, and we have kick, which is this track, and then we have bass as this track, and then we're taking that input and sending it to the sidechain. So not to the group here. It won't go directly to the group, but it will go to the sidechain input of this plugin. And then it each has their own sidechain input. And as you can see, that makes it show up in different colors and different waveforms and not summed together. So with span, it's a little bit more difficult to figure out. You have to have the same kind of setup as well, where you take your reference track and you take your, in this case, we took just our kick and bass track together because that was a little bit easier. And then you send it to the actual group in this case. As you can see, it's going to the group and not to the sidechain. It doesn't really matter, but it's a little bit easier to follow it like this. You can also do it by sending it to the sidechain, but seeing as the group one is free, that's okay. But you can see we have one pan to the left and one pan to the right. So we'll convert it into mono signals. We're not going to care a lot about the stereo signal. There might be a little bit of stereo processing that you want to do in your kick and bass. But for this tutorial, we'll keep it mono here. And then in here, how this works is first you have to open up the groups bar. So make sure that this is ticked. And then you can set up the different groups here. And you should be able to see these. We're currently setting it to reference with KB being the underlining one. So you can see we have our reference here and then our underliner, our underlay here, which is KB, which is our own kick and bass. And that's also in red where the other one is in green. So they match the color of what we have down below here. But then you have to set up the routing. So we take the input routing here and you can copy this over. where we have C and D. These are the main inputs. So this is the left input and this is the right input. And then C and D are going to go to the group of reference and the right therefore. So this channel is going to go to the bass or the kick and bass group. I hope it's a little bit that it's okay, that you can understand it. It's a little bit hard to explain with these groups because it's a difficult setup, but I hope that it works. Also, if you want to change these names, you can also change the names of the groups, and that will change these names down below here, which is also something I've done. If you're not familiar with span and you don't know how the routing works and you haven't seen this particular setup, then make sure to actually check out how span works before going into this, because it might be a little bit hard to understand otherwise. But that's the setup that we have, and that's the setup that we're going to use to change our kick and bass, so to make it sound a little bit more like our reference. We're not going to aim to make it sound exactly the same, but we just try to copy the tone. So the first thing we need to do is just check if all our timings are correct, and if all our sounds are correct and stuff like that. So the very first thing that we see from the waveform, when just looking at the waveform, is that here with the bass, you can see there's a lot of sub, because there's a lot of movement here, right? So you can see this long kind of sine wave sitting throughout it. Whereas with this first hit, you can see the sub from the kick, but there is no sub from the bass. So it might be handy to split this up into two different channels. So let's duplicate this, group these together, and call this bass. And then we can select the first note by deleting these and go like this. And then we'll just drop them together like that. And now we can, for example, go into our patch here. And inside Serum, it's very easy. What you can do is you can go in here and just click this little button to have the harmonic editor open up, and you can just remove the sub like that. So you don't have any phase issues with filtering. You don't have to high pass it. It's just removing that sub bass there. And then that should be fixing any like major clashes that you might have with the sub of the kick and the sub of the bass. Obviously, you still need to try to align it properly and make sure that that works. But that should fix at least like the sub clashing and stuff like that. And it's just an easier starting point for you. And it's not going to change the tone of your bass sound a whole lot. Okay, so now that we have that done, we should probably start and referencing and looking into our tone of our kick and bass and see what we can do to make it sound a little bit nicer. So generally I use a sample for my kick and bass, or at least my kick. I generally synthesize my bass, the bass myself, but for the kick I tend to use a sample. That's also the case in this track here. But we can try to synthesize one. As you can see, I already started off with a synthesized kick. This is a kick I've shown off before, but this is part of what is effectively going to be my next preset pack for Serum, which I hope to be releasing very, very soon as well. Right now I'm at around 70 presets, but I want to get up to 100 at least. But this is one of them, and it's just a simple kick that you can kind of like edit, almost as if it was one of those kick synthesizers where you have the graph of the pitch. So let's play around with that a little bit. So we have our kick here, and you can see we're just dragging this around. You can really change the kick, and you can set the amount of click that you want. And we can edit the envelope as well. So let's turn this down a little bit to get a nice big sub sound here. Something like that is a little bit closer. But for now, let's take a look at our kick and bass through span here. Let's just play both of them. If I unsolo that and we'll turn off the bass here, you can see that our kick is not really looking that nice. We are lacking a lot of stuff in here, and then it's just going up a lot. So we can just EQ that out for this one. So let's open up a simple EQ for now. First of all, I want to take out the low pass filter or the high pass filter here, because that's generally going to introduce a lot of phasing issues. Normally my EQ defaults open with the low pass filter opened up, because then I can easily high pass an element if I need to. But for now that doesn't need to be, so we can just remove that and kind of play around a little bit with it. Now what I'm doing is still going to introduce a lot of phasing issues, but we can resolve those by just rendering this to audio later. So let's take out that click there and turn this up. Kind of needed a shape like this. Let's take a look at it again, see how it looks now. It's still looking like it could use a little bit here. You kind of need to try to ignore the bass a little bit and try to see if you can at least shape the kick a little bit more like what the reference is doing. We can also see that there's some noise up here. If we play it, you can also hear that. It starts with a little bit of noise in there on the transient, which is something we can add as well. So let's do that by grouping these two together and call this kick main, and we'll add another track which we can add a hi-hat to. So we'll add that and we'll just find a hi-hat sample that works for that. I think we can go to the Cashmere pack for now and just grab a closed hi-hat sample and kind of shape it the way we want to. So we generally want that to be very short. You can see this transient here is a little bit noisy, but it's mainly in here. And then here it's already a clean wave. So we're just going to take out a little portion here. Slow that down or fade it out and then turn this down a bit. Maybe a bit longer. Let's turn it down a little bit more in volume. Even more. I don't want this to take over, obviously. And we just want the very high end, so we can just drop that out there. And that just gives that little bit of top noise that you often hear in a track. So now let's try to compress those a little bit together. I think that's a nice next stage that we can use, or that we can do. Before though, I do want to check span again to see if we're still on the right path. So again, we have to unpause that, and we're still lacking a little bit in the mid-range here. So from around 100 to, let's say 500 Hertz, we could use another boost there. Should probably also do this, take that off. And yeah, okay. So let's just add another EQ. What I like to do if I have an EQ shape that works already for a certain area and I don't want to mess it up because maybe I've used all the dots, like in this case, you can just add another one and add something like that. Just a little bump there. Maybe a bit more towards the below 100 area. Let's take number 6 and add that here. Going to be a bit more like that. Also, you can use the scale to set kind of an amount here, which is a very useful tool there. Let's try that again. Open this. And we have to ignore like the loudness of it, but I think it's okay. The only thing I would say is that it's not rolled off enough here at the high end. So we can just roll it off here. So now that should be closer in terms of the spectrum. Yeah, as you can see, it's looking pretty much like the spectrum, only less loud, and obviously you can see the individual harmonics of the bass line, which in the kick aren't present, so just try to ignore those. Try to get the general shape a little bit more. So now we have to do the same thing with the bass line, where with the bass line it's a little bit easier to do that with span at least. What we're going to do is we're going to duplicate this and copy this over, which we'll do in this way here by deleting this and just taking one beat where we just play the bass all together, and then we can just sample this last bit here and duplicate that twice, and now we should just have the bass looped. So in this one, what we want to do before though is we want to reset these to the right channels so we can start using this as well. First I want to look at span again, see if the basses look the same in terms of the spectrum. Where here we have to turn on the bass again. You can see we're missing a little bit here, and we can add a little boost there, but it looks like it's a little bit of a comb filter effect if you look at how the wave is kind of shapen. So that's probably a stereo image thing. It does show that that we kind of need to bring up that mid-range a little bit, which we can do, for example, with some compression. So let's take a multiband compressor and add that to our bass line here. And I'm going to start off with the dance preset, which generally works very well for my basses. And then I'll set this to just the lower harmonic. And we can see the settings if you want to copy this over as a starting point. As you can see, it's doing very little compression here. It's doing no compression, and the same for here. But we can still use this and set it up to be a little bit more effective. So let's start with the higher band, which for the crossover, again, you can see the values here if you want to exactly copy this. I recommend doing this a little bit more by ear though. But what I recommend doing is just turning down the compressor, especially the attack and the threshold, until you have a little bit of compression everywhere. And you just kind of squash the dynamics of what input signal you have a little bit. So same for this one, I'll just turn down the attack a little bit. Not too much so it doesn't start distorting. Just kind of want to take the top off and make it a little bit less dynamic and a little bit louder therefore. Same for this one, you can just turn that down. Maybe we want this to sit there, not. That's kind of up to you. Turn down the sub a little bit. But that's getting us closer to what we want here. And that's the first step generally also in my general kick and bass process when making a kick and bass, is some multiband compression to kind of flatten it out. So now let's again look at span and see if what we're doing still makes sense. And it's looking like it's maybe a little bit too high here and not high enough here. That's something we can fix with an EQ though. So let's take an EQ8 and throw that on here and just slightly bring up these harmonics. Obviously again take off the filters to make sure that it's not going out of phase. And we'll take this up here. I'm going to put this away for a little bit on the monitor so I can scroll down, and now we can edit it once again. So I want something like that. This one needs a little bit more of a dip. Kind of try to follow the same shape as what is already there. Generally try to get the same tone out of it. And then we want to let's turn on the 8 so we can roll it off nicely here. So obviously there's a few things you cannot see on span itself, and those are like the timing, the length of things. So that's where cyscope kind of comes in handy here, which we'll check out here. Let's first start by turning down our reference like a whole lot. Let's do -8 so they're the same. And the first thing you can see is that it's slightly flipped, right? And probably also in a different key, if I'm going to be honest. Or not. No, it doesn't look like it. It doesn't look like to be in a different key. But what we can see, let's zoom in on just one of them. And to the very start. You can see that our bass here has a bigger click in the reference than it has in our own one. So what you can do is kind of mess around with the phase for that. So let's play with the phase a little bit and just with the patch in general. So what I like to do is have attack at 0, obviously, and then this is 179 is the standard where I start with, but we can try 178. And that's going to have the starting point be just before this click here, and that's going to add the click to our bass. So that should increase the click a little bit. Now we can go back to cyscope and check if that's actually true. You can see we have a little bit more of a click, but it's not really there. A different trick you can use is to add, for example, an attack from a kick, if you have a very short one. Let's let the noise go through there. You can kind of just turn it up very loudly to see if it works and to see if it sits nice with the sound. I think at 80% I like it, but obviously that depends on the pitch that you're playing and the kind of sound that you have. So try to mess with that, and then you just kind of slightly mix it in like this. Now we can see back at our cyscope, see what's going on. If we look at it, you can already see that we have a little bit more of a click here at the start. It's still kind of messy around here, but we can turn it up a little bit more, I think. So let's do that. Let's go back to our bass, turn it up a little bit. Another thing we can do to kind of shape our overall tone a little bit more, and something I like to do with my basses generally as well, is to set, instead of using an envelope, using LFOs. So we're going to set up LFO 2 here, and then LFO 1 is going to go to our volume of this one. And we're both going to set these to 16 notes, and now we can draw in the shape that we want. So we'll do something like this. Obviously here we want the shape like this, and we want it to turn off right there, and then just set both of them to envelope mode. Let's again look at our span or our cyscope and to see if the timings are getting similar. You can see if we look at the waveforms that our filter on our reference is closing a little bit more than what we have on our own. So let's add that. It's a little bit hard to hear for me on headphones, so I'm sorry if it's not exactly the same. But I hope you get the idea of what I'm actually doing, and you can apply it to your own productions as well. So this should be it. Obviously we can turn the level of the noise down a little bit now. And we should be having a better bass sound now. So now let's listen to what we have. First of all, what I'm going to do is just copy over this patch to the other track that we had and just remove the sub again, like we did before. So we'll just remove it like that, and then that should be okay. Our kick is still not really that great, so let's play a little bit more with that actually. I'm going to do some more EQ work, I guess. Let's get rid of the bump beneath the kind of click area of your kick. You can up that a little bit, and that should already be better. still not sounding as loud as I wanted to. So now we're going to process our kick and bass together, and we should get the final version that we want. Normally I don't process them together on like a separate kick and bass chain, but most of the kick and bass processing happens in my master, so that adds the loudness and the dynamic or like the dynamic range, turns that down a lot. So for that, again, I have a little bit of a standard process where I use the dance as a starting point, like this. And again, you can copy over the settings. These are the crossovers. If I hover over them, these are the settings. For each one of them, you can see this is dynamic detection, and obviously our compressor settings down below there. And you should be able to replicate this on any multi-band compressor capable of doing 4 bands. Otherwise, if you have the M Dynamics MB, then it's just the dance preset, and then set this harmonic to be just the sub bass of your bass and not the first harmonic. So that gives you that kind of deep sub sound that is really nice here. Now we can add a limiter to it, set it to punchy, and drive it in there a little bit. One thing I like to do is turn down the volume of this one like a lot. Again, whatever you like. So now let's look at our kick and bass again and see if it's sounding nice or looking nice. What I'm going to focus on is I'm going to turn off our reference, because I'm feeling like we're done with the reference now. And instead we're going to look at if it's mixed well and if it's working properly in terms of the mixing. So let's look at it. Let's sum them together. You can see our kick is very loud in comparison to our bass line. That's something a lot of people tend to do, but I don't like it. I tend to, as you can see here, have them try to get them at a similar loudness. So let's turn down our kick a little bit, and let's try to shape our kick differently as well. So we're going to turn this up and this down a little bit. So that's going to make it a little bit bass heavier, but that should also make it a lot more uniform, as you can see. So looking at these two together, I still feel like this bass line is a little bit loud for what we have in relation to the kick. So we can turn up the kick a little bit again, going into our processing, of course, and we can open it up again. Check the summing. Let's turn this one down a little bit more. Starting to look nice. We can scoop out a little bit more, I think, right there from our kick. So let's go back into our main kick part here. Turn this down a little bit earlier. Let's look at that. That should sound like a nice kick. That does look like a nice kick. Okay, so now that's what we have. And I'm pretty happy with that. The final few things that you might want to check is obviously that you're not post ringing on your bass line. So what I like to use for that is LFO tool, and just put it on there and just open it up like this, slide it down here, and that makes sure that this little post ringing that you can see here isn't actually coming through and going to the final processing, and that should help make your kick and bass a little bit more stable and make it look a little bit nicer. So now let's look at the summing again, and as you can see, it looks good, it looks nice, and we can also check it on span, see what it's doing there. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a different tone. If you want, you can try to replicate the other tone a lot more, but it's very, very close, and I'm really happy with the result. So that's going to be it for the tutorial today. It's been 30 minutes of me trying to fix this kick and bass, but I do really like the way it sounds, and I hope you like it too. I hope the techniques that I showed were helpful, and it allows you to analyze your kick and bass more against the reference, and also against the other elements. So for example, analyze your kick against the bass and your bass against the kick and stuff like that. And kind of show you how I would generally go about getting a good kick and bass. But that's going to be it for today. Again, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like. If you're new here, subscribe and join my Discord as well. So yeah, that's all I have to say. I was thinking that I needed to say more, but that's not the case. So anyway, bye bye.